Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, you and I are going to explore, basically the absolute limits of human commitment.
Yeah, we really are. It's an intense one today.
It really is. We are pulling from a highly intense, deeply philosophical, primary source document.
Right.
It's actually a prayer, or I guess you could call it a speech, delivered on May 16th, 1956.
By Reverend Sun Myung Moon.
Exactly. And it's titled, Please Let Us Become Offerings on the Abel-Type Altar. Though you might also see it translated as the living sacrifice of the Abel-Type Altar.
Yeah, that translation pops up a lot too. And it is a remarkable piece of historical rhetoric. I mean, when you read it, you aren't just reading a standard theological statement.
Right, not at all.
You are looking at, honestly, an architectural blueprint for total psychological and spiritual surrender.
Totally. And our mission today is to analyze the nuts and bolts of that surrender. Like, we want to understand the step-by-step process this text lays out for, well, breaking down human nature.
Bringing it down entirely, yeah.
Right. And to be crystal clear up front, when we examine religious or ideological texts like this, our goal is not to endorse the theology or take sides.
Of course not.
Our aim is just to neutrally unpack the fascinating rhetoric, the psychological demands, and, the core ideas presented in the original source material.
Exactly. We are essentially looking under the hood of a very complex ideological engine to see how it operates.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, the mechanics of persuasion and devotion here are incredibly intricate, regardless of your personal worldview.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we have to start with the title and the central metaphor of the entire document, which is the Abel-Type altar.
Right, the altar.
To understand the psychology here, you kind of have to start with the imagery. Usually when you picture an altar, you imagine like a heavy piece of furniture, right?
Like a slab of stone in a cathedral or something.
Exactly. You bring a gift, you set it on the stone, and you step back. There's this comfortable, safe distance between you and the sacrifice.
But Moon shatters that distance immediately. I mean, right from the start.
Yeah, how so?
Well, the text opens with a plea to heaven, asking that the time spent bowing down becomes a time of earnestly giving offerings, just as the blood of Abel cried out.
Oh, wow.
Right. The followers aren't asked to just bring an offering to an altar. They are asked to actually become the altar and the offering simultaneously.
That's a huge distinction. But before we go deeper into the psychology of that, we probably need to establish the baseline logic for anyone who might be a little rusty on their biblical narratives.
Sure.
Why Abel-Type? What is the underlying mechanism of an Abel-Type offering that makes it the gold standard in this rhetoric?
So it traces back to the book of Genesis, the story of Cain and Abel.
Right, the two brothers.
Exactly. Both brothers bring offerings to God.
Yeah.
Cain, the older brother, brings fruit from the soil. Abel, the younger one, brings the firstborn of his flock.
Okay.
And according to the narrative, God accepts Abel's offering, but rejects Cain's.
Which obviously causes some major sibling rivalry.
To put it mildly, yeah. But the theological consensus here, and the mechanism Moon is leveraging, is that Abel's offering wasn't accepted just because of the material itself.
It wasn't just about the sheep versus the fruit.
No, it was because of his absolute disposition. Abel represents the acceptable, pure sacrifice. It's an offering completely aligned with heaven's will, given with a pure heart.
Got it.
So by calling it an Abel-type altar, Moon is setting a standard of absolute, uncompromising acceptability. It is a sacrifice that heaven simply cannot refuse.
Which sets a phenomenally high bar for the individual believer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Moon lays out the first mandatory step for reaching that bar, and it is just a brutal dismissal of the physical self.
Brutal is the right word.
Right. The text explicitly asks for guidance not to become people who gather centered on our bodies which will decay.
That phrase is so striking.
It really is.
Yeah.
Instead, they're supposed to become a sanctified, fragrant offering. But I'm curious, how does focusing on physical survival, this, decaying body, how does that prevent someone from becoming this Abel-type offering?
What's fascinating here is the stark inversion of our basic human operating system.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the very bottom, our foundational drive is physiological safety. Food, shelter, avoiding pain.
Survival basics.
Right. Moon is arguing that if a group gathers with their primary focus on those physical comforts, they are essentially worshiping the temporary.
Worshiping the temporary.
Yeah. The text uses that phrase, bodies which will decay, to deliberately diminish the value of the physical form. If you are protecting a body that is destined to turn to dust anyway, your energy is pointed entirely in the wrong direction.
So it's a distraction.
Exactly. You cannot be a pure outward-facing offering if you are holding, say, 10% of yourself back, just to make sure you have a comfortable place to sleep.
It reminds me of the ultimate act of gift giving, but taken to an absolute extreme.
How so?
Well, like, if you buy a generic gift card for someone, it costs you a few dollars, but it leaves you entirely intact, right? You're not changed by it.
Right, it's low stakes.
Exactly. But if you pour your time, your emotional vulnerability, your deepest efforts into crafting something for them, you are actually giving away pieces of your finite life.
That's a great way to put it.
And Moon is basically asking his followers to skip the gift card and put their absolute essence on the altar.
Yes, all of it.
But personal surrender isn't enough on its own here, is it? Like, if you were just meditating in a room, ignoring your physical body, that doesn't actually accomplish the broader goal of this text.
No, it doesn't, because Moon shifts the burden dramatically from the internal individual to the external environment.
Right. The environmental context in this prayer is defined by this profound, urgent crisis.
It's an emergency.
Yeah. The text pleads with heaven, saying, please awaken this city which is sleeping.
The sleeping city.
Right. And it goes on to ask heaven to take pity on a people who does not know the direction and is wandering in darkness.
It paints a very bleak picture of the outside world.
Very bleak. It literally begs for heaven to quickly establish and call its children to represent the whole.
And here we see this powerful duality introduced. The sanctified awake offering versus the lost sleeping city. Moon frames the surrounding population as completely adrift.
Like they have no anchor.
Exactly. They have no true north, no center.
Okay, but I have to push back on the psychology of this setup for a second.
Sure, go for it.
If the ultimate goal of the text, like we just discussed, is total self-sacrifice and shedding the ego,
Yeah.
isn't calling yourself the only awake person in a city of sleepwalkers like the ultimate ego trip?
That is a really valid question.
It just seems wildly contradictory.
Yeah.
You are telling people to ignore their bodies and be humble, but simultaneously telling them they are the sole anchors capable of saving an entire population wandering in the dark.
Right. It sounds like a paradox.
Doesn't that secretly inflate a massive messiah complex in the individual? Like, I'm the only one who gets it.
That is the exact tension that makes this document so potent. But Moon manages that paradox by redefining what it actually means to be the anchor.
Okay, how does he redefine it?
Being the awake person in the sleeping city is not presented as a position of privilege or power. It's not a VIP club.
Right.
It is presented as a crushing responsibility. Remember, an altar isn't a throne.
Oh. Oh, wow. That's a heavy distinction.
It's a place of slaughter. It is a place where things are burned. Moon is telling them they must become the focal point, a center directed towards heaven. Not so they can rule the city, but so they can be consumed to provide light for it.
So they are the fuel.
Exactly. The wandering and darkness of the people necessitate a sacrifice. The followers are called to represent the whole, meaning they bear the collective sin and burden of everyone else.
Taking on the weight of an entire sleeping city, that definitely shifts it from arrogance to a kind of terrifying accountability.
Right, it completely changes the tone.
Yeah, because if they don't wake up, it's on you. The city stays asleep because you failed.
Precisely. The text states, please allow us to quickly realize a center directed towards heaven. They are the anchor for a lost collective. If the anchor fails, the ship sinks.
And to function as that anchor, the individual has to undergo the next phase of this internal demolition. Because we've dismissed the physical body, right?
Yes.
And we've taken on the burden of the sleeping city. Now, the text actively attacks the mind.
The intellectual surrender, this is key.
Right. Moon prays for the followers to become meek and humble offerings before the heart of our parent. And then he gets incredibly specific about what humility actually looks like in this context.
He doesn't leave it vague.
No, not at all. He asks that the followers frankly lay before you all our concepts, ideologies, and the things we insist on, and to fully realize their own inadequacy.
Things we insist on.
Yeah,
That phrasing captures the essence of intellectual stubbornness so perfectly.
it really does. Because we build our entire identities around the things we insist on.
Oh, absolutely.
Our politics, our theological interpretations, our opinions on how the world should work, shedding those ideologies feels far more difficult than ignoring physical comfort.
It's way harder.
It's like trying to install a massive new software update, but refusing to uninstall your old operating system. If your ego is still running as an active firewall in the background, it is going to block every new piece of code heaven tries to download into you.
That is a fantastic analogy. Moon clearly understands that intellectual pride is the final, most dangerous barrier to total surrender.
Because it's sneaky.
Exactly. If you bring your own concepts and ideologies to the altar, you aren't really offering yourself. You are negotiating.
The negotiation.
Yeah, you are looking at heaven and saying, I will be your living sacrifice, but only within the parameters of my current worldview. I will serve, but I maintain the right to judge how I am used.
A conditional surrender. I'll surrender, but I get to keep my opinions.
Right, which totally negates the entire concept of the Abel-Type altar. The text explicitly warns against this by asking heaven, please do not allow us to become people who would receive blessings through a conceptual attitude of faith.
Okay, let's define that. A conceptual attitude of faith. Basically, keeping your beliefs strictly in the realm of theory.
Exactly. A conceptual faith is safe. It is an academic exercise.
Right, you can debate it at a dinner party.
Yeah. You can hold beautiful, complex theological ideas in your head without ever letting them dictate your actual actions. It protects the ego because you are still the master of the concept.
You're still in control.
Yes. By demanding the followers lay down their ideologies, Moon is forcing a transition from theoretical belief to raw, vulnerable action. He requires them to step into the dark without the safety net of their own opinions.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. The text demands they feel like a sinner, recognizing their personal inadequacy every single time they stand in the holy presence.
It is just a deliberate, systematic dismantling of self-reliance. I mean, you dropped a body, you take on the crushing weight of the city, and then you willingly wipe your own hard drive of all your personal opinions.
The architecture of this surrender is intense.
It really is. And it leads directly to the absolute climax of the text. Because once you strip away all of that ego and ideology, the very reason you are praying in the first place changes entirely.
We finally arrive at the most profound psychological pivot in the document.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Moon outlines a historical paradigm. He says, a history of crying out, save me, has gone on for 6,000 years.
Millennia.
Yeah. For 6 millennia, the default human posture toward the divine has been a plea for rescue. You know, save me from the famine, save me from my enemies, save me from hell.
The classic prayer.
Right. But then Moon demands that this 6,000-year-old habit be broken immediately. He prays, therefore, please allow cries of prayers which are able to say, please accept me, be heard upon the earth.
Accept me.
And he follows it up with the ultimate declaration. Since I give you everything I have, please accept me.
The magnitude of this shift cannot be overstated. It totally redefines the core utility of religion.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though, because this entirely flips the script of human self-interest.
It goes against every instinct, yeah.
Right. From an evolutionary standpoint, or even just a basic psychological one, why do people engage in faith? They want the life raft.
They want security.
Exactly. They want grace, blessings, and an assurance that they will survive the storm. So to tell people to look at 6,000 years of asking to be saved and to demand they just stop.
To stop asking.
Right. To demand they volunteer to be the wood that the life raft is built out of. You are removing the primary incentive for faith. Why would anyone willingly abandon the plea for salvation?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Moon's framework suggests that asking to be saved is still fundamentally an act of profound selfishness.
Even asking for salvation is selfish.
In this context, yes. Because it means your ultimate concern is still yourself. The previous steps, ignoring the decaying body, dropping your personal ideologies, those were specifically designed to eliminate that selfishness.
Okay, I see.
You cannot make the leap to accept me if your underlying software is still running a survival program. The text actively warns against having minds that only seek to receive grace.
It draws a thick, permanent line between a transactional faith and a transformational one.
That's the perfect way to frame it. In a transactional faith, the believer operates on a ledger. You know, I perform this ritual, I hold these beliefs, and heaven pays me back with salvation.
Like a spiritual vending machine.
Exactly. The power dynamic keeps the human at the center of the story. Heaven is just the vending machine dispensing grace.
Right.
But Moon's transformational sacrificial faith completely destroys the ledger. When you say, accept me, you are surrendering all control over the outcome.
You don't get to demand a receipt.
No receipt. You are no longer asking heaven what it can do for you. You are asking how you can be entirely consumed by heaven. You aren't asking to be rescued from the sleeping city. You are asking to be accepted as the fuel to light the fire that wakes it up.
Because an offering on an altar doesn't get to ask what happens next. A piece of wood doesn't ask the fire for a favor.
Right.
The offering is simply given. The text actually notes that this must be done with minds of repentance, feeling the original nature of goodness. You are reverting to a state of absolute blank slate compliance.
Which triggers the final mechanical sequence described in the text. Moon argues that this specific level of absolute surrender is the only thing that actually mobilizes the divine.
The ultimate cause and effect. So, what actually happens when someone manages to lay down their body, their ego, and their desire to be saved?
The text outlines a massive cosmic response. It states that heaven is actively hoping for this kind of work. When the Abel-Type altar is finally established, the Holy Trinity moves.
The Holy Trinity moves.
Yes, and the work of the Holy Spirit appears specifically to take charge of all activities. The divine doesn't act until the human offering is completely empty of its own agenda.
The surrender is the catalyst. It basically forces heaven's hand.
The text concludes with a vision of the ultimate goal. Moon asks heaven to raise up an altar of saints who offer everything to heaven alone.
And the key defining characteristic of these saints.
The result of laying down those ideologies earlier is that they have absolutely no ideas or perceptions that are different from your will.
No ideas or perceptions that are different from the will. That is the final destination of this psychological journey.
The very end of the line.
The altar, the offering, and the divine will become entirely indistinguishable from one another. There is zero friction between the human and the divine because the human has uninstalled everything that could cause friction.
It demands a level of self-abnegation that challenges every modern notion we have about individuality, self-actualization, and, personal empowerment.
Completely.
We live in a culture that tells us to find our truth, to speak our minds, and to prioritize our boundaries. Moon's 1956 prayer demands the exact opposite. The obliteration of personal truth in favor of becoming a pure, unresisting instrument.
Let's zoom out a bit and look at the whole picture we've painted today. We have traced a profoundly intense architectural blueprint for surrender.
We really have.
It starts with the harsh reality of shedding our focus on the physical, decaying body. Then it expands outward, forcing the believer to take on the terrifying responsibility of waking up a blind, wandering city.
Then it drives inward again, demanding the painful, deliberate stripping away of our most cherished personal ideologies and intellectual stubbornness.
Right. And it all culminates in that staggering paradigm shift. The command to abandon a 6,000-year-old human habit of begging heaven for a life raft.
And replacing it.
Replacing it with a singular, terrifying plea to be wholly, completely accepted as fuel for the fire. Since I give you everything I have, please accept me. It is a masterclass in the rhetoric of absolute devotion.
And, regardless of your theological background, analyzing how Moon constructs this progression provides incredible insight into the mechanics of ultimate commitment. The logic holds together with ruthless efficiency.
It really is a relentless piece of text.
Yeah.
And I think it leaves you with something highly provocative to chew on.
Oh, definitely.
As you step away from this deep dive and go back to your day, I want you to think about your own deepest commitments. Look at your own life, whether it is your career, your marriage, your art, or your own personal faith.
Yeah.
When push comes to shove, how often are you operating under that 6,000-year-old habit? How often, in your most important relationships or goals, are you secretly operating on a ledger, crying out, "What can this do for me?" or "Save me from my problems"?
We all do it.
We do. What would happen if just once you approached the most important commitment in your life and stopped negotiating? What if you uninstalled your ego, dropped your insistence on being right, and instead of asking what you could get out of it, you simply laid yourself on the altar and said, "Please, accept all of me"?
It's a powerful thought.
It completely changes the shape of the room. Thanks for exploring this with us.